Clothes tumbled from the second-floor window like discarded scraps, landing with a dull thud on the driveway. That was the physical manifestation of my marriage's collapse, and the mastermind behind it all was my 16-year-old stepdaughter, Tess, who, over 9 months of painstakingly calculated planning, had woven an intricate web of lies. When her father, Kieran, finally relented and let me come home to admit my mistakes and apologize, I showed up armed with a stack of evidence powerful enough to expose every single one of our carefully constructed facades. The scene that followed descended into utter chaos, spiraling completely out of control. But before I dive into the details of this expensive truth-revealing showdown, I need you to first see just how absurdly ridiculous the whole disaster began. It was Tuesday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there I stood in my own driveway, watching helplessly as my clothes were flung out the second-floor window, scattering like confetti at the worst parade in the world. My husband, Kieran, was shouting upstairs, his face contorted with a fury I'd never seen before. He told me to get out of his house, though the house wasn't his at all. It belonged to me. But we'll come back to that later. Just this morning, we'd still been having breakfast together, and everything had seemed perfectly fine. Now, his 16-year-old daughter, Tess, stood behind him, her expression a strange mix of triumph and feigned concern. She placed her hand on his shoulder as if to comfort him, playing the role of a dutiful daughter. Yet through the window, her gaze met mine for just a split second, and I swear I caught a tiny smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. That smirk made me realize everything in an instant. This wasn't some misunderstanding, nor was it just a typical teenage squabble. No, this was a carefully planned, flawlessly executed conspiracy. She's been playing a grand game all along, while I've been going around like I'm just playing checkers, completely guileless. Let me take you back and tell you how an utterly ordinary Tuesday morning ended up being the day my marriage fell apart. My name is Lexi, I'm 38, and I work as a federal procurement officer. The job is dull yet stable, and the pay is decent, but whenever I try to explain what I do at parties, people always end up staring at me blankly. I've been with this agency for years now. My income is steady, my benefits are okay, and life has been predictably uneventful. Usually, the most exciting moment of my week is deciding which barbecue joint in Pinebrook, Virginia, I'll head to for lunch. 4 years ago, I met Kieran at a local coffee shop. He was the manager there at the time. He was handsome, kind, and a widower whose wife had passed away 3 years earlier from illness. At the time, his daughter Tess was 12 years old, a quiet child who'd seemed a bit lost ever since she'd lost her mother. I can understand how you feel. Losing your parents at that age leaves wounds that are nearly impossible to erase. I fell in love with Kieran almost immediately. After dating for a while, I proposed to him, and he said yes, tears streaming down his face. I promised both of them, the father and the daughter, that I'd never try to take Tess's mother's place, but that I'd always be there for them, by their side. And I meant it wholeheartedly. The first 2 years were truly wonderful. Of course, Tess was a bit distant at first, but I understood why and never forced her in any way. Whenever she needed help with her homework, I'd step in without hesitation. When she wanted to go over to a friend's house, I'd drive her there myself. I paid her phone bill and covered her clothing expenses. I never hesitated or skimped on anything. When we got married, I bought a bigger house so that Tess could have her own space, a proper bedroom, rather than that tiny room she'd been sharing in Kieran's old apartment. Kieran is so happy, and we're all happy too. I thought Tess was slowly getting used to things as well. Looking back now, it's only now that I clearly realize when things started to take a turn, when the poison began slowly seeping into our marriage, just like water eroding rock, quietly yet devastatingly. About 9 months ago, Tess started making veiled remarks in front of her father. Sometimes, when I'd walk into the room, I'd happen to overhear a few of those comments. On the surface, they sounded like a child praising her dad, but beneath the words lay a sharpness that made me feel utterly uncomfortable. She'd tell him how smart he was, how he could have become an executive, and how he deserved someone who'd treat him like a king. At first, I thought it was just a kid being sweetly flattering her dad. Kind of cute, right? But later on, whenever Kieran and I set down some rules, like curfew times, homework requirements, or basic household chores, she'd bring up her late mother, saying things like, "Mom would have made me do this," or "Mom understood me better." At first, Kieran would firmly put her in her place, telling her that I treated them just fine and that it wasn't fair to compare them this way. But those words never stopped, and little by little, they began to wear down his patience, subtly and insidiously. She'd also start questioning why they had to follow her rules in a house that, according to her, belonged to them, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd bought the house myself. The property deed listed only my name, and I'd been paying the mortgage every month without complaint. In Tess's mind, this was their home. I was merely a temporary guest. I tried talking to Kieran, suggesting that maybe Tess was just having a hard time adjusting and that we should consider family therapy. But he dismissed it all as typical teenage rebellion, saying I was being overly sensitive. Yet I noticed that the way he looked at me was gradually changing, almost as if he were scrutinizing me, searching for something. It was as if Tess's words had planted a seed of doubt in his heart, and that seed had already begun to take root and sprout. Later, things got even weirder, so weird that I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Tess was completely different in front of her father and behind his back. When Kieran was around, she'd chat and laugh with me as if we were close friends, calling me by name in a warm, friendly tone and asking me how my day had been, as if she were genuinely interested in the mundane details of my shopping trips. But as soon as Kieran left the room, even if he'd just stepped out of earshot, her face would instantly darken, becoming utterly expressionless, as if someone had flipped a switch, shutting off all her emotions. I tried to engage with her, suggesting we do something together, but she'd always stare at her phone, responding with a word or two before quickly dismissing me. Yet as soon as Kieran returned, the cheerful and friendly Tess would reappear immediately, as if nothing had ever happened. This girl was constantly putting on an act in front of her father. As soon as he was gone, she'd instantly drop the facade. The real explosion, the very beginning of the end of this marriage, began when Tess asked me for a car. Not just any car, but a Lexus sedan worth $32,000, a gift her friend Lena had received for her 16th birthday. I sat her down at the kitchen table and tried to reason with her, explaining that $32,000 was simply too much to spend on a teenager's first car. I told her we could find a reliable used car for around $10,000, safe and durable. I even suggested she take on a part-time job to help cover the insurance costs, which would also teach her a sense of responsibility. She stared at me as if I'd suggested she walk barefoot. Then her face suddenly crumpled, and she ran back to her room. I could hear her sobbing loudly and dramatically, all the way through the house, those loud, theatrical sobs that echoed in every corner. That night, Kieran was unusually cold toward me and questioned whether it was really necessary for me to turn her down. He went on at length, recounting everything Tess had been through, losing her mother, being forced to adjust to a new family, and asked me if I couldn't just grant her this one small request, just for her sake. I was stunned. $32,000 for a teenager's first car? That was simply unreasonable. I argued with him, trying to explain basic financial responsibility, but he just turned his back to me in bed and said I had no idea what it felt like to be a father. How absurd. After that incident, everything changed, as if some switch in our marriage had been flipped, and suddenly I'd become the enemy. Tess started whispering quietly with Kieran, and as soon as I walked into the room, they'd immediately stop talking. Kieran would force a stiff smile my way, then quickly change the subject, but the damage was already done. He started questioning me for no apparent reason, asking whether I really liked Tess, why she felt I'd become a completely different person whenever Kieran wasn't around, and whether I resented her being part of our lives. Every time I tried to defend myself, he'd retort, "Why would my daughter lie?" That's exactly the trap she set, isn't it? Tess's accusations were utterly unassailable. Little by little, she'd crafted this image of me as a two-faced person, sweet and caring in front of Kieran, yet utterly repulsive when left alone. Arguments became an everyday occurrence. None of it was real, yet every time I tried to explain, Kieran would ask me if I was accusing his daughter of lying. It didn't take long for me to realize that Tess had meticulously planned everything, carefully amassing evidence bit by bit, weaving together one small lie after another to build up her accusation against me. Then, the worst thing happened. That day, I came home from work utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally, from spending the entire day dealing with a difficult client. Kieran was waiting for me at the door, and the look on his face sent a chill down my spine. His voice trembled as he said, "We need to talk about Tess." At first, I had no idea what he was talking about. I'd been at the federal government building all morning and hadn't seen Tess at all. He pulled me into the living room, where Tess was sitting on the sofa. As soon as I saw her expression, my confusion instantly turned to panic. She looked terrified, an unshakable, gut-level fear. Kieran rolled up Tess's sleeve, revealing a bruise on her forearm, a deep purple mark roughly the size of a palm. With tears in his eyes, he told me that Tess had confessed to him that earlier that morning, I'd grabbed her and accused her of becoming increasingly agitated when he wasn't around, and she'd even admitted to being afraid to be alone with me. My world seemed to spin wildly in an instant. I had never, ever touched that child, not once. Not in 4 whole years. I shouted in excitement, desperately trying to tell him this wasn't real. If he didn't believe me, he could check the access control records at my office door. But he took a step back, as if I were some kind of dangerous person. He said he hadn't wanted to believe Tess in the first place, but what she'd said was just too specific, too coherent, simply impossible to ignore. Kieran avoided my gaze and said the scariest thing was that Tess had told him I seemed to have 2 different faces. Just then, I glanced over at Tess, who was sitting on the sofa, watching it all unfold. For a split second, maybe only half a second, her expression became utterly blank, even tinged with a hint of curiosity, as if she were watching a scientific experiment. Then she noticed that I was staring at her. Her face instantly contorted into a look of sheer terror, and she bolted toward Kieran, crying out for him to stop me from hurting her. It was this very performance that utterly broke Kieran. He told me to pack my bags and leave, saying he needed time to think things over and ensure his daughter's safety, and asked me to move out of the house before he could sort through his thoughts. With trembling hands, I packed my belongings, my mind in utter chaos. As I loaded everything into the car, I glanced back one last time and saw them standing at the upstairs window. Tess had her arm around Kieran, comforting him like a dutiful daughter. But just as she thought I couldn't see her face through the glass, I caught a glimpse of her looking down at her phone, a faint smile playing on her lips. That smile confirmed what my heart had already suspected. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a meticulously planned, perfectly executed conspiracy. On my way to my sister Zoe's place, one question kept circling in my mind. How long had this 16-year-old girl been plotting to destroy this marriage? During my first week at Zoe's house, I was completely in a state of shock. Zoe kept urging me to fight back. But what good would it do? He'd already decided that I was the monster in this whole story. I sent Kieran a text, begging him for a chance to explain himself, but he never replied. By the 2nd week, the shock had begun to fade, replaced by a growing sense of determination. I started retracing all those details I'd overlooked, piecing together clues I'd never paid attention to before. The bruise on her arm had appeared far too conveniently, right after our big argument over buying the car. It was just too suspicious. I realized then that I needed evidence, conclusive, irrefutable proof. First, I reached out to a lawyer, a family law attorney named Marcus Harper, who had an excellent reputation. He listened patiently to my story without interrupting me once. He explained to me that since I bought the house and the title was solely in my name, that gave me considerable leverage. But if I decided to file for divorce, we'd need to start preparing the necessary documents as soon as possible. Then, I hired a tech consultant named Ella Chung, who had previously helped my sister Zoe's company recover its data. I explained the situation to her and asked if there was any way she could legally obtain Tess's digital footprints. Ella wasn't surprised at all. She said, "Teenagers' digital footprints are everywhere. If she really did plan all this, there'll inevitably be some evidence left behind." Less than a week later, Ella uncovered our first major piece of evidence. We had a joint account that Kieran and I used to cover household expenses and savings. Over the past 6 months, this account had been quietly bleeding. A total of $7,500 had been withdrawn. Each withdrawal was relatively small, so despite working 60 hours a week, I hadn't noticed anything unusual. All the money had been spent on gaming equipment, expensive clothing, and food delivery. All the transaction records pointed directly to Tess. But what chilled me the most was that Kieran must have known all along. Several of the transactions required approval from a minor's guardian. Bank statements showed that he'd transferred money from our savings account to cover Tess's overdrafts. He'd been hiding this from me all along. Ella also uncovered something else. A few months ago, just as Tess started escalating her attacks on me, Kieran applied for a credit card in his own name alone and almost immediately maxed it out, spending another $5,000, most of it on things for Tess. When Ella laid all this evidence before me, I felt utterly sickened. It wasn't just that Tess was manipulating her father. Kieran had been actively deceiving me all along. For the sake of his daughter, he'd given up our marriage and our financial future. There's more, she added. Ella said as she opened another file on her laptop. Our family's phone plan includes cloud backup service for all our devices. Thais's phone has been continuously backing up data to your account. She showed me the data. Some deleted text messages that had been automatically backed up, chat logs between Thais and her friend spanning nearly a year, filled with discussions about her plans. Dad's starting to suspect her. One of the texts read, "Just give him one more nudge and that old woman will finally be out of the picture." In another conversation, Thais even laid out her manipulation tactics in detail to her friend Lena. "As soon as I start crying, Dad'll believe me. It's that simple." But the most outrageous text, the one that finally revealed the whole truth, was sent right before everything came to a head. "It's almost time," Thais wrote. "The bruises are ready. Show them to Dad tonight. That should be the last straw." Those bruises were deliberately inflicted by her herself. She intentionally hurt herself to frame me. Ella also found other evidence, a video file stored in Tess's cloud storage, probably recorded accidentally. In the video, Tess is alone in the bathroom, staring at her forearm, then deliberately slamming her arm against the edge of the bathroom counter again and again, until a deep purple bruise appeared on her arm. "I hope this works," she murmurs in the video. "I sat there, watching this 16-year-old girl harm herself in order to destroy my marriage, and felt a wave of physical discomfort wash over me. What kind of person would do something like this?" Ella showed me more chat logs, conversations between Tess and Lena about their plans after the divorce. "As soon as they're divorced, Dad'll want to leave this boring little town," Tess wrote. "She'll sell the house, and we'll finally be able to move to the Washington metropolitan area, where there's really something worth living for. And besides, without her around, Dad'll have more money to spend on me." It turned out that it was all about the money and about moving to a different place to live. Tess wanted a life that was completely different, and I'd become the obstacle standing in her way. Now I hold all the evidence, records of financial fraud, manipulative text messages, even videos of her deliberately inflicting bruises on herself. After reviewing all the evidence, Attorney Marcus told me that it was enough to support my divorce, and that I could secure a very favorable division of assets. "This is actually one of the clearest cases of fraud and manipulation I've ever seen," he said. A few weeks later, on the very night he kicked me out of the house, I finally received a text from Kieran. "Have you ever reflected on your own behavior?" The message read. "Tess says that if you apologize to her and promise to change going forward, she's willing to give you another chance. We can talk about your return home, on the condition that you've genuinely taken a serious look at what you've done." I stared at that text message for a long time. He hadn't asked me how I was doing. Instead, he demanded that I apologize to the child who'd orchestrated this nightmare. All I replied with were 4 words: "Come by 3 p.m. tomorrow." For the rest of that evening, I gathered all the evidence into one folder and printed out the text message records, bank statements, and credit card bills. Tomorrow, Kieran would finally learn the true nature of his daughter, and our marriage would come to an end, irretrievably. At exactly 3 p.m., Kieran arrived at the coffee shop. I'd chosen this place deliberately, a neutral location, a public space with plenty of witnesses. As he walked in, his face wore an expression halfway between anticipation and nervousness. Perhaps he'd expected me to break down, burst into tears, apologize to him, and beg for his forgiveness. I let him speak for about 30 seconds, then raised my hand to interrupt him and pushed a thick manila folder across the table. "Open it and take a look," I said calmly. The first thing he saw was the divorce papers, official documents stamped and certified by the court, already signed by my lawyer. His face instantly turned deathly pale. "We can work this out," he started to say. "Keep reading," I interrupted him. He flipped through the pages one by one, and I watched his expression change bit by bit as he came across bank statements, credit card bills, and those highlighted entries showing that Tess had spent $17,500 within just 6 months. His hands began to tremble. "I can explain," he tried to say again. "Just keep reading." I cut him off once more. Then he saw those printed out text messages, the chat logs between Tess and her friend, meticulously documenting her entire manipulative scheme. When he read his daughter's words, "It's so easy to lie to Dad," I could see the shock in his eyes. "This can't be real," he whispered. Just then, I pulled out my phone and played the video, turning the volume down low enough that only he could hear it. In the video, Tess's voice rang out clearly as she kept bumping her arm against the counter again and again, muttering, "I hope this works." Kieran's face completely crumpled. "She's been playing you," I said coldly. "For months, she's been slowly tearing our marriage apart because she wanted you to sell my house and move us to the Washington metropolitan area." The text messages made it all perfectly clear. He started sobbing. "Why didn't you let me see the truth earlier?" he asked through tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," I replied. "I'm begging you to talk to me," I said, my voice icy cold. "But you won't even bother to reply. You've got no evidence at all, not even bothering to ask me what really happened, yet you chose to believe Tess. You kicked me out of my own home based solely on a lie. You were supposed to be my husband." My voice rose slightly. "You were supposed to trust me, give me just a little bit of faith. After 4 years of marriage, you should have questioned things, asked for proof, done something. But you didn't. Because deep down, you'd already chosen Tess and given up on me." Just then, the cafe door slammed open with a loud bang, and Tess walked in. Clearly, she'd been sitting in the car outside all along, unable to bear any longer not knowing what was going on inside. She spotted us immediately and stormed over, her face flushed with anger. "What did you do to my dad?" she demanded loudly. Then she spotted the scattered documents on the table. "No matter what she told you, it's all a lie," Tess immediately said to her dad. I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward her. A video of her inflicting those bruises was frozen on a frame, clearly showing her face. "You're framing me for abusing you," I said calmly, "so I'm perfectly within my rights to investigate your stuff." Kieran stared at his daughter as if he'd never seen her before. "Tell me this isn't real," he begged her, his voice breaking. "Tell me you didn't do any of this." Just then, Tess's facade finally crumbled completely. "So what if I did it?" she shouted, her voice growing louder and louder. "You've never been happy being with her anyway. She's boring and stingy, and she's not even my mom. We should have left this lousy place a year ago." Kieran gasped as if he'd been punched in the gut. "You're willing to destroy my marriage just for money and a change of scenery?" he whispered. "You made me believe my wife was abusing you, just so you could move in with your friend?" I interrupted their argument. "You've got 30 days to find somewhere else to live," I said firmly, but not loudly. "The divorce papers are crystal clear. Once that deadline passes, I'm taking back my house." Kieran looked at me, with eyes full of despair. "Please," he begged, "give me some time to process all this, to fix what's broken between us." But I'd had enough. "There's nothing left to salvage," I told him. "You accused me of being a monster without a shred of evidence, and you let your daughter manipulate you for months on end, without ever once questioning her motives. Even now that you've finally learned the truth, you're still begging me to give you another chance, but you've never once given me a single chance to trust you." Kieran completely fell apart, covering his face with both hands and bursting into tears. Tess stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression defiant and furious, despite the fact that her entire plan had utterly collapsed. I rose from the table, gathered up my copy of the divorce papers, and told them once more, 30 days, and then you'll have to move out of my house. I gently pushed back my chair and headed toward the exit. I could hear Kieran's sobs, as well as Tess's voice rising in anger as she started arguing with him. Her tone grew even sharper, perhaps even trying to talk her way out of it, shifting all the blame onto someone else. A month later, my lawyer called to confirm that they'd moved out on time. They'd found a tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of Richmond, a place that was nothing like the house they'd just left behind. Attorney Marcus said that Kieran had tried to claim a share of the marital assets, but he had no legal basis for doing so. The house had been mine even before we got married, and he'd also been involved in stealing $7,500 from our joint account. My sister Zoe learned through mutual friends that Kieran is now devastated and can hardly function normally at the state clinic where he works in Virginia. Tess blames all her misfortunes on him, complaining that he's too slow to act, that he failed to sell the house, and even accusing him of ruining her plans. Their relationship has reached the brink of collapse. Now that their plan has fallen apart, she's still stuck in this boring little town she'd been desperate to escape, and she's treating Kieran with the same manipulative and dismissive attitude she once used toward me. Sometimes late at night, I feel a flicker of melancholy over it all, but more often than not, I feel a sense of lightness, as if I've finally broken free from those chains. The end of this marriage wasn't so much a loss as it was a sobering redemption, a wake-up call that showed me clearly. The foundation of any marriage is never mere compromise and self-sacrifice, but rather mutual trust and the steadfast commitment to stand side by side. While the complexity of human nature may bring betrayal, it also teaches us how to safeguard our dignity and hold firm to our underscore even amid ruins. I may have lost a relationship I once thought would last forever, but in doing so, I've regained my whole, authentic self. Those years of effort weren't wasted. They've become armor for my growth, helping me realize that true happiness isn't about being dependent on someone or some relationship. Rather, it's about having the courage to start anew and stay true to oneself, no matter what life throws at you. And that, above all, is the most precious lesson life has taught me.